My roommate's asleep, so I'm not in my usual filming spot because I didn't want to bother her. This was my dad's. I got it for him because he loved the space race and the history of like the Apollo missions, and he told me that the Apollo astronauts kept these, and I think Neil Armstrong wore his to work in the garage. So for his birthday one year, I got my dad this so that he could wear it while working in the garage, and then after he passed, my mom asked me if I wanted it, and I said yes, obviously, but I am like swimming in it. The sleeves are rolled up like 3 times. It's got tons of pockets, which is very cool and useful when you're in space, as I will never be. Unfortunately, I've already read all of the Lady Astronaut books by Robinette Kowal. This video is not me reading those. I've already read them and loved them. They're great. I was not always interested in the space race, but as you can imagine, and as I mentioned, my dad was, and so I sort of found my own way to get interested in it. Same with World War II, he was always interested in that, and I got interested in female pilots in World War II, but I'm not into the like mainstream World War II history, nor the mainstream space race history. Like, I love Hidden Figures and involvement of women in the space race, and I really like learning about Sally Ride, and I like, if I'm going to be reading sci-fi, I really like near future sci-fi, like Project Hail Mary, where it's kind of a comparable level of technology as what we have today, and it's not like almost, you know, the tech indistinguishable from magic, as Asimov talked about. It's stuff that we could like conceivably understand. We don't have faster than light travel, or not as fast as light travel yet. There's like, you know, zero gravity, and everyone has to know all the technical details. I find that really interesting. That is the type of book that I'm focusing on in this video. Historical or near future, or in one case like recent past to contemporary, books about female astronauts. I am finally going to read Atmosphere. I haven't read any Taylor Jenkins Reid books since Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I loved. And then she finally came out with another book about a queer woman, and I was like, great, I can read something else by her, because just none of her other books have really interested me. Atmosphere is on my TBR for this video. Also, The Six by Loren Grush, which is a nonfiction account of the first 6 women trained as astronauts by NASA. Also, this book called The Star of Moon Village that I learned about at my local bookstore, which is a near future story about a young black girl living on the moon. The landscapers just started up, so sorry if you can hear a weed eater. The dog is here, so sorry if you can also hear any tip-taps. The first book that I'm going to be reading, or rather listening to on audio, is To the Moon and Back by Eliana Ramage. This is a book about a Sapphic Native American woman who is trying to join NASA. I've heard that she can be a bit of an unlikable character, and that she lets her ambitions get in the way of her relationships with other people. God, it's so loud. I used to think that I didn't like unlikable characters, and then I found that I don't mind them as long as they're not like in a position of power, but that's just personal preference. But I'm excited to get started on this one. I've been wanting to read it for a while and had to hold off until I was ready to film this video. So I'll let you know what I think at the 50% mark. I'm no longer wearing the flight suit. It's very warm, and it's also several days later. I've made it to the 49% mark of To the Moon and Back. We just started part 3 when I put it down, so it seemed like a good part to stop. I was listening to this on audio, I'm not sure if I mentioned that, and I was struggling to pick it back up when I put it down. And then I thought, what if I get it on my e-reader and see if I like it? And I don't know if it's like the audiobook narrator's fault necessarily, or if just when I picked it up on ebook, it got to a point that I was enjoying more, but it's a much better reading experience for me, and I'm really, really liking this book. I've been rating literary fiction pretty highly these days, and I don't know if I'm just, it's a thing as I'm getting older, or I'm able to find ones that I like. I don't know. But yeah, like I said, once like part 2 kind of starts and once we introduce this other character, Della, that's when my interest really started to pick up steam for this book. And I realized that I didn't tell you a lot about this book when I introduced it. So it starts in the 90s, and we're following Steph, who is a young Cherokee woman. We meet her when she's quite young. She's living with her mom and her sister in Oklahoma on the Cherokee Reservation. Her mom's boyfriend, Brett, has kind of fostered this love of the stars in her, and Steph knows that she is going to be an astronaut. She's going to be the first Cherokee woman in space. And if you know anything about the process to becoming an astronaut, it's extremely, extremely difficult. And Steph, being a poor woman of color, is already at a severe disadvantage. Part 1 was particularly rough because it seemed like everything that Steph wanted or worked towards got snatched away from her in a way that was just like so frustrating. And is Steph likable all the time? No. Does she do stupid, bad things? Yes, but at the same time, like, I feel so badly for her, and I'm really rooting for her. I want her to succeed. She's worked just so hard and had just all of these shitty things happen to her. A big part of the book is her relationship with her mom, Hannah, and how her mom is not like pulling her down. She is supportive, but at the same time, there's kind of this air of like, you're a bad Cherokee woman because you want this thing that white people do usually. And Steph is held up an example next to her sister Kayla, who is very invested in the Cherokee community, learning the Cherokee language and learning their history in a way that Steph finds very annoying. The book does not frame Steph as being in the right, but just that she's annoyed by her little sister, which, relatable. So much of what Steph is battling against in this book is that kind of like crab bucket mentality of, well, they don't let people like us do that, so why are you even trying? And also, a lot of her peers are interested in going to college for something that will return to the Cherokee community and directly benefit the Cherokee community, while what Steph wants is seemingly a very selfish desire, which is, you know, personal ambition and gain of becoming an astronaut. I agree with Steph, of course, that having representation in astronauts is really good and helpful, but the book is not interested in, like, serving up a message to you on a silver platter. Something that is also complicated in Steph's life is, in part 2, she goes off to Hollis University in Connecticut. I keep meaning to look this up. I'm not sure if it's a real place or not. And she joins the Native American Student Association, aka NASA. There are several jokes about this. And meets a fellow student, Della. So we get some chapters from Della's point of view. We're still mostly in Steph's. Della was at the center of a big custody battle when she was a child, where her white mom basically gave her up for adoption, like, before she was born to this white Mormon family, but her dad, who's Cherokee, was fighting for her to be adopted by a Cherokee family, which is, I think, part of the Indian Child Welfare Act, but I'm not sure if that's something that is actually on the books or something that Native activists have been fighting for, so I need to look into that more. But the idea is that, as kind of part of the 60s scoop, when Native children are adopted by white people, it is a form of cultural genocide of these Native children not being part of their community. Even if their parents are well-intentioned, they're not living within their community and culture. So Della's father lost the custody battle, and she only gets to see him one day a year. So she and him have kind of a complicated relationship. And she keeps insisting that she loves her parents, where she does have a complicated relationship with them as well. When Della and Steph meet, it takes them a little bit to, open up and trust each other, but they do fall in love and start dating. I know I keep using the phrase complicated relationship, but it's one of those things where, like, I have seen relationships like all of these, the parent-child, the girlfriend, intimate partner, where it is complicated. And I think that something that literary fiction is good at doing is depicting those complicated relationships, where, like, a lot of the times that's what literary fiction is about. Where fantasy, like, primarily it's telling a fantasy story, and the, like, primary things that you're focusing on are, like, the world building and the fantastical elements and the plot. In a romance, the two characters are good for each other and usually have a good relationship, or they do by the end of it. And in literary fiction, at least the ones that I've read and enjoyed, we're not trying to get to a specific happy ever after by the end of it. And so, like in the salvage that I read in May, we can show the, like, messiness of relationships, where sometimes you and your partner are going to really annoy each other, or sometimes you're going to have a, like, fundamental conflict about something where neither person is wrong. It's just that you're not able to come to an agreement about something. So I am rooting for Steph and Della to figure things out, but at the same time acknowledging Steph is not always a good girlfriend, and Della keeps things tucked inside that she really ought to talk to Steph about. I'm excited to get to, I don't know how much of it we're going to see in this book, but to get to astronaut training. The main characters just graduated college when I stopped, and it seems like Steph's scientific career is about to start, and that's what I'm really interested in. Like, now that I'm emotionally invested in the characters, I am interested in them, but I am also excited to get to the astronaut stuff. I have a feeling that things are going to get worse for Steph before they get better, and that she's going to mess some more things up. And I think that we might get more POV from Della, and then maybe, like, her mom or sister. Oh, Kayla, the younger sister, that's a whole other thing, where Kayla's got her own stuff going on and ends up, like, pregnant and a teenage dropout at this point in the book. So Steph and Kayla have to figure out their own relationship, because Steph really looks down on Kayla for not trying to go to college. I finished To the Moon and Back, and I really liked it. I'm gonna give it 4 stars. Now, I think the reason that I liked it is that Steph, like, for the first half of the book, she is kind of hard to root for, but also she's, in her childhood to early adulthood years, and so it's easier to root for her and forgive some of the things that she does, because she's a kid, she's a young adult, they do stupid things sometimes. Believe me, I know, I was one. You say thoughtless things, you upset people without meaning to or meaning to. But Steph just gets to a really low place even after she is chosen as an astronaut candidate, and she becomes worse the closer she gets to her goal, and the more she has to lose, the more scared she is, and the more pushing away she does, and the more fucking up of relationship she does. And she becomes someone that is not a good person, and that, like, no one wants to be around. But because of that low, and there is a very awesome pivotal moment in the book that gives her this realization, the catharsis is so satisfying, or at least it was to me, of her finally getting her head out of her ass and realizing that she has all these people that like want to care for her if she would just let them in and stop being an asshole. There were some things that I can kind of write off as like a debut novel thing. There were some threads that got lost that could have been incorporated better or more smoothly. But I think that the character work and the emotional heart were there and were very much strong and effective in the story. We skip over a lot of Steph's life. I mean, it starts in the 90s and ends in present day, basically. And so we're not able to see everything about her life, nor everything about the lives of her family, which I would have liked to see a little bit more of, her mom and sister and niece. And I wanted to see a bit more of the astronaut training, but like, I've read that before in other books, so you can assume that that happened. That is not the point of the story. The point of the story is Steph's ambition and how much that damages her and the people around her. And as I said in my 50% update, like, this is a book about people and relationships. It's literary fiction. It's not really about the astronaut training, as much as I enjoy reading about that. I might reread The Faded Sky by Mary Robinette Kowal for this video, we'll see. While I was reading this book this week, they announced the crew for the Artemis 3 mission, and it is all men, so I'm disappointed about that. It's very cool that there is a Black astronaut and a European astronaut, but in leading up to the crew announcement, people were speculating about who would be on it, and there were so many qualified female astronauts that they were discussing, and so it's disappointing that none of them were selected, even though I know that a female astronaut is going to be on the Artemis 4 mission going to the moon. There are still so many great qualified women that could have been on this crew. As I'm doing this video, I think it would be remiss of me to not talk about, you know, what it means to go to space and go to the moon and all the money that's spent on it, and how so much of the space race and our current space race, which is sort of with China, is a nationalist project. But I think that, and I hope that, based on the reading that I've done and the people that I've heard from, that it's still a worthwhile thing, and the science and discovery and all that we learn is worthwhile, and that missions to the stars and to other planets should be done with that lens and not from a settler colonizing lens, if that is even possible. Like, I read A City on Mars by Zach and Kelly Weinersmith earlier this year, and they made a very good case that we do not have the capability to have large populations on Mars or the moon currently, and that we may not for hundreds of years, and that's okay. And what that would do to people, how that would work legally, how we would be able to protect people that are in those environments, like legally but also physically, and how there's great potential for exploitation in those environments when you can't just leave and go start a group elsewhere. Someone is controlling the air that you breathe. To the Moon and Back is grappling with that question and never answers it. Like, I think I might have said this in my 50% update as well, that this is a book that is not interested in giving you, you know, a message necessarily. It's just the characters are grappling with something that we're grappling with, and there aren't easy answers. I think that we have the capabilities to fix climate change on Earth and explore the stars, and I think that those are both things that we should be pursuing, and I'm willing to change my mind on that. Like, I've learned things in the last few years that have given me a lot of good insights into that kind of thing, and raised as I was by a dad who was unabashedly interested in the space race, it took me a long time to see the nationalism that went into that project and how a relentless push for the stars is not necessarily a good thing, and that it should be done with a lot of thought and care. I don't know if we'll ever be in a far future humanity on lots of different planets future, but I know that I like reading about it, and I know that I like reading about scientists and people who train to be astronauts because it's something they believe in and because they want to be there for all of us. You know, I'm sure that they are very personally ambitious. You have to be to get to that point, but they are people who have trained so hard and so diligently and who are very, very good at what they do and who really believe in the science and the vision of space and that discovery. And it's just unfortunate that that sound clip of Tim Curry is no longer true, that space is no longer the one place untainted by capitalism. I'm feeling a little bit emotionally drained after finishing that book, so I'm gonna leave that here. The next book that I read will probably be Atmosphere because I have the audiobook checked out now, so I'll give you a real quick description, even though I don't really know that much about it, but I also think that it kind of needs no introduction. It's a Taylor Jenkins Reid book about a woman I have been assuming is based on Sally Ride. She's a queer astronaut in the 80s. I know that something big happens at the end of the book that makes people very emotional, and that's it. I think those are all the things that I know about Atmosphere. And I know that I'm going to start reading it soon, so you'll see me when I know more. Back to you. Very quick update. I wanted to show you my new Project Hail Mary hat. And because I was feeling sick yesterday and I just wanted a comfort read and to not have to film a video about it, I reread The Faded Sky by Robinette Kowal, but I started at the point when they head out to Mars, which happens like almost halfway through. I forgot how long it takes to get there, so I did not reread the whole book. I just wanted the space stuff. It was like simultaneously, I didn't remember a lot of the details, I just remembered certain scenes. There's some things that are like very emotional and visceral, but I also, there wasn't anything like surprising, you know, so it wasn't as fun as reading it the first time around. But it is interesting reading this after having read the next two books in the series where you know more about what's going on Earth and on the moon during the communications blackout with Earth, and then knowing what's going to happen on Mars after they land, so between the events of the end of the book and the epilogue. And then you find out in, oh, it's off camera, The Martian Contingency, book 4. And my throat is hurting too much, so I'm gonna stop there. I've been meaning to film this update for a while and I just haven't had a chance, so Atmosphere has been stuck at the 52% mark for a few days now while I've waited to film this update. I am enjoying this. It's just exactly what I was looking for, just the story of a woman becoming an astronaut. But at the same time, it's like there's nothing unexpected, really, and the prose is just fine. I think where Reid succeeds is in what she doesn't say. She leaves things unsaid in a really meaningful way, especially in the relationship between Joan and Vanessa, and the yearning is really good. At this point, Joan doesn't even realize that she's attracted to Vanessa, but I think like Vanessa can tell that she is queer and just like hasn't realized it yet, and Vanessa has really big butch energy. We are in two timelines. One is following several years over the course of Joan's astronaut training, and then these sections that are alternating between Joan and Vanessa's POVs that are kind of moment by moment working through this crisis in the shuttle program where Vanessa is in Earth orbit and Joan is Capcom, aka capsule communicator. That is the only person that gets to talk to the astronauts in space, and it is almost always an astronaut themselves. So Joan is hearing all of these administrators and engineers and scientists talking about how to work through a problem, and then she is the only one who can communicate that to Vanessa, and they're trying to decide what to tell and not tell Vanessa so that she can execute her mission properly. So that part is very exciting, and we're seeing what's happening to people as we're getting to know them in the earlier timeline. Something that I really liked in Evelyn Hugo, which is the only other Reid book that I've read, is the platonic relationships are great. Harry and Evelyn was the like standout relationship of that book. I remember there's a point in that book that's really devastating. I was listening to it in the car and I was crying so hard, and when I got home, my dad was like, "Are you okay?" And I think that the platonic relationships in Atmosphere are really well done as well. I also am hoping that there's going to be some kind of like big conversation or confrontation between Joan and her sister Barbara. Barbara is expecting Joan to be a co-parent to her daughter Frances, and Joan loves Frances but is an astronaut and can't always be there to co-parent, and Barbara is just like not understanding that, and she wants her free childcare. But the relationship between Joan and Frances is so sweet. It's funny actually that 2 books now that I've read for this video, Atmosphere and To the Moon and Back, involve a lesbian astronaut with a younger sister who had their daughter young, and the daughter and aunt relationship is important to the book. So it's a funny through line in these 2 books that came out at like the same time. I don't really have much more to say than that. I feel like it's not, like, Atmosphere is not bad. It's just like hitting all the beats that I expected it to. And like I said, the prose is like just doing its job. So there's not a lot like to say about it other than this is the plot and these are the things that I liked about it, and I can kind of see where the story is going, and that's kind of it. It's feeling now like a 3.75 to 4 star, but I don't feel like it has quite the same emotional depth or like thorniness that To the Moon and Back did. I'm in my hotel in Portland. I'm filming this while I'm in Portland, so you'll have seen my Portland vlog a few weeks ago before this video comes out. I listened to the last half of Atmosphere on the train down here, which is good because I couldn't read because I was very, very motion sick. About 5 minutes in the audio after I last updated you, Joan and Vanessa, a big shift happened in their relationship, and after that it was like all of the incredible yearning and love and writing about love that I adored in Evelyn Hugo was suddenly there, and it was so good. Like I loved the second half. I loved Joan and Vanessa's relationship. They were just truly, they were girlfriends, they were partners, they were in a permanent, long-lasting relationship. And also, as I had hoped, and I might get choked up when I talk about this, there was a big thing that happened between Joan and her sister Barbara and her beloved niece Frances. And just like in Evelyn Hugo, it was the platonic, the familial relationship that had me so emotional. Like I was crying on the train about this. It was so beautiful and satisfying, and it was perfect. It was like, I was over the moon. It was exactly what I wanted. And then I think I mentioned at the beginning that one of the few things that I knew about this book was that it ended abruptly, and the ending was very emotional. I don't want to spoil it. And the voice acting from the audiobook narrator was really good. There's this like these few big moments from Joan where she's super emotional, and like give this audiobook narrator an award because she did an awesome job. And when I was in Powell's earlier today, I like picked up the book and flipped to the end and reread the ending, and it made me cry again. So because I'm feeling so emotional about the book and kind of like riding the high of the emotions still, I rated it a 4.5 stars. I may change that, but right now, just with like the strength of the relationships and the strength of the second half, I am rating it higher than To the Moon and Back, because I still think that the To the Moon and Back was deeper and it had more to say, but I liked the relationships more in Atmosphere. That's not to say that they were better, I just liked them more, and you know, it's easier to enjoy a book more that has a more likable character in Joan versus Steph, but like Steph is not supposed to be a likable character, so that it like makes total sense. Not that I need to compare these two, I'm just explaining why I rated Atmosphere higher than To the Moon and Back when they are such similar books. It's almost making me want to pick up more Taylor Jenkins Reid books, but I don't know if they're gonna have that combination of like platonic and romantic love that I really latch onto in the two books of hers that I've read, so I'll maybe look into that. I mean, I am a sucker for like big emotional moments, and from what I know about like Carrie Soto's Back and Malibu Rising, I don't know that they necessarily have those. I think they're kind of like quieter books. And maybe I'll like the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes straight romances, I don't know, but I sure as heck love the way she writes lesbian relationships. It is interesting that in Atmosphere and Evelyn Hugo, the character like doesn't know she's sapphic until she meets a woman that she's attracted to, and it's like, that's the only one she's ever been attracted to. So if she writes more sapphic relationships in the future, which I would like to see, I would love to have the character be a little bit more like aware of her sexuality before she meets like the one woman, the only woman to exist. The relationship between Joan and Vanessa kind of like obviously comes to the forefront in the second half, and there is like a little bit less astronaut stuff, but I found myself just like not missing it. I was just so all in on the relationships in Joan's life. There's also a relationship with her fellow pilot, Griff, who asked her out and she turned him down, and he was very sweet about it, and that was just like not present. And I would have liked to see a little bit more of their friendship, but I also don't know that there was like necessarily room for it, and it made sense that after she rejected him and got with Joan, that was like the precursor to this relationship, and now we're focusing on that. I really want to know what happens after the end of this book to these characters, but like, aren't you always gonna want to keep reading about characters you like? So I'll just have to content myself with what's on the page. So yeah, really liked Atmosphere. Is it gonna go on my favorite books of the year list? Maybe. We'll see how I feel in a few weeks. But right now it is one of my highest rated books of the year. I can't believe I hadn't worn my NASA shirt yet in this video. What am I even doing? I'm packing for a wedding this weekend. I'm going to my cousin's wedding. My family's gotten an Airbnb at the wedding location, so you might see some travel footage or just various hanging out. Probably not wedding footage, I think that would be a bit weird. I'm taking with me The Six by Loren Grush. So this is, I may have already mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but this is a history of the first 6 female NASA astronauts. I know that Taylor Jenkins Reid did a lot of research for atmosphere from this book, so I think that there might be a little bit of like repetitive information. But I'm really interested in the astronaut like training process and the whole process of like being in space. And so I think that this book, more than any other that I'm reading for this video, is going to deliver that for me. It's pretty long, and there also might be some repetition of information about Sally Ride since I have read a biography of her. We've got an insert in the middle of the book with color photographs. It's really cool to be able to see the images of the women that this book is going to be talking about. I know the most about Sally Ride, and so I'm interested in learning about the other 5 women. At the beginning, there is a cast of characters, which lists the 6 women, like where they're from, their credentials, and some interesting things about them. And this needs to go back to the library very soon, so I really better finish it this weekend. I'm gonna get started on this. I don't know if I'm gonna have the opportunity to update you when I'm halfway through, so we'll see where the weekend takes us. Footage from the wedding and the trip. It ended up being a little bit stressful and we had to do some last minute pivots and running around, so I didn't get as much footage as I wanted to, but I did get to spend time with family, which was really nice. During the trip, I didn't read any of the 6. I got home today and went to the local park and ended up reading a good chunk of this, and then just a little while ago, I got to the 50% or so mark. I went a little bit over, but I was trying to reach the end of a chapter. As I predicted, I'm definitely seeing the inspirations that Taylor Jenkins Reid took for atmosphere. Like, there are specific moments that were replicated in atmosphere, and a lot of the training that Grush talks about is training that Joan and Vanessa have to do, and kind of the conflicts brought up in here are in that as well. I'm really enjoying it. It's so easy to read, and even though the women are a little bit hard for me to keep track of, I have to flip to photos and the cast list sometimes. I think that she does do a good job of humanizing them and showing really what they thought in a really seamless way, and having quotes or interviews from people who were close to them about them or about this particular point in time. Something that I am noticing in this book that's not present as much in Atmosphere is the scrutiny on these women and the camaraderie that they had to have between them. Grush does make a point of saying that they ended up forming close relationships with men because so many of them had to do pilot training and get a certain number of hours a month with pilots, which were all men, and so they ended up forming friendships or falling in love with those men. And while they were supportive of each other, and because Joan and Vanessa are part of a different cohort, there isn't as much scrutiny on them as female astronauts as there are in this book, because they're the 6 first ones, which makes sense for how they're able to keep their relationship a secret. And there's also a lot about the shuttle program, the development of the shuttle, delays that happened that pushed the flights out later than expected, and also how many of these women had relationships with and got married to fellow astronauts within the Corps, some of them come in already married. There is a character in Atmosphere who marries a fellow astronaut and gets pregnant, which also happens here. Being an astronaut and a mother is talked about more in the 6 than Atmosphere, which makes sense because Joan and Vanessa aren't mothers. I mean, Joan arguably is mothering her niece, but it's different. These women are so admirable and so just smart and qualified. Several of them are doctors, whether that be like medical or scientific doctors. There's insight into the selection process that happened, how they got picked, and also other personnel at NASA, including George Powell, I think his name is. He's the flight director, I think. He's the one who chooses who goes on what missions. And there's a character basically based on him in Atmosphere. I imagine it's weird to read Atmosphere and see it as kind of like an alternate history of like the history of the space shuttle program, but with different people in charge, because Taylor Jenkins Reid chose not to write about real people aside from the ones that you have to mention, like Sally Ride. But I think that the like director is different, and astronauts in Jonah Vanessa's candidate training group are different than people who were actually in the astronaut program. And then the disaster that happens in Atmosphere is different from the Challenger disaster. And it is like sad to read about Judy Resnick and know that she's going to die on board the Challenger, and just knowing how incredible she was and about her family and loved ones, and kind of the dramatic irony of knowing what's going to happen. This does touch on the 3 people of color who were selected as astronaut candidates. So there were 2 black men and 1 Asian man, and I don't know if they have biographies. I would assume that I think his name is Guyon Bluford. He's the first African-American man in space. I would assume that he has a biography or autobiography, and that's something else that I'd like to read about too. I'm enjoying this. I've got a quiet evening, so I think I'm gonna go keep reading this, and I might even finish it tonight. I've finished the 6. I stayed up late last night to finish it, and I'm giving it, I can't remember if I said 4 or 4.25 on the story graph. It might have been 4.25. It was really enjoyable, very readable and understandable, and I continue to like the way that it was laid out. So where I had ended, Sally Ride was about to make her historic flight on the shuttle, and besides following her journey and also the scrutiny that she was under from the press and how stressful that was for her as a private person, we then spent a chapter on each of the other 5 astronauts and their first shuttle flights. So I really liked that, and it really like added to the idea that this is a book about all 6 of them. They're all equal subjects. And some of the missions talked about in here were just like the stuff of sci-fi, the stuff of an Andy Weir novel, so much ingenuity and intelligence that went into these missions and the way that they dealt with certain problems. In particular, so part of the space shuttle program was the shuttle had this huge payload bay, which allowed the missions to launch satellites into space, which satellite creators were paying a lot of money for. And this continues to this day. Like, satellites are sent up all the time in rockets. There's like no other way to get them up there. And a really important component of this process was this robotic arm that could like reach in and take the satellites out, and then also grab things and put them in the payload bay. Sally Ride in particular was really good at this, which is why she was chosen to be the first woman from NASA in space, was because she was so good at that. But all of the women trained on it, I think. On one of Rhea Seddon's missions, there was a whole thing that happened that was like, could have come straight out of The Martian. In fact, if Andy Weir didn't take inspiration for The Martian from this, I'll eat my Project Hail Mary hat. Basically, they launched a satellite and it was supposed to deploy an antenna so that it could start working, but one of the astronauts looked at it and realized that it hadn't like come on yet when it was supposed to. And when I think they like zoomed in on it and they saw that a switch hadn't deployed. And so they created, with the help of NASA, this like these two instruments that they would attach to the robotic arm that the robotic arm could then use to pull the switch. And what they had to do was they could send photos to NASA, but NASA couldn't send photos to them. They only had like basically a fax machine or like a I don't know. I don't know that era of technology very well, but they could receive documents from NASA, and they were also obviously talking to them audially. So NASA sent them extremely detailed instructions for how to build these two instruments. They were called the fly swatter and the lacrosse stick. And what they had to do was like create a component, take a picture of it, send it to NASA, make sure they got it right, and then go on to the next thing. Also, on this mission, a US senator who sat on the like committee that gave NASA funds was on the mission. And so he's like helping make the stuff. He helped sew some of it. I want to write a book with like this particular scenario where there's all of these astronauts and then like one guy that's not an astronaut, but he has other skills that unexpectedly come into play. So they finish building the fly swatter and the lacrosse stick. They send a picture to NASA, and the like engineer corresponding is like, that's perfect. You did that exactly right. That's incredible. So they use it, and ultimately it doesn't work. And it's not because they did anything wrong. It's just that the problem wasn't with the switch. But that was so cool to read about. And then NASA sent them an updated like checklist of all the things that they needed to do to get ready to go. And it was 30 feet long. Like it kept printing and it filled the entire cabin. Another anecdote that I loved, it's kind of gross, but Judy Resnick was on her shuttle mission and the toilet was having issues. And so they had to pee into Apollo era bags. But the thing about pee in space is that it doesn't like stay in the bag. The particles can like bounce back out of the bag, and you have to like go through the cabin with like a tissue and clean them up out of the air. And so they derived this method where they would put a sock in the bag so that it absorbed the urine. And so every crew member was like sacrificing their socks for this. And at one point Judy like floats past another crew member, and she has socks on, and he like starts grabbing her socks off her feet, and she yells, "Help, I'm being socked." Good stuff. Just, you know, it feels like sci-fi, but it really happened, and these were real people who were so eminently well-trained and qualified. And it was just all about like, yes, they wanted to beat Russia at certain things, but it was all about like exploration and discovery. And then it culminates kind of expectedly in the Challenger disaster, where Judy Resnick, along with 6 other astronauts, lost their lives. And it also covers the investigation into how that happened. And if you know anything about the Challenger disaster, you know that there was a failure with these O-rings in the fuel, and they lose their ability to be flexible when it's cold. And in fact, an engineer had advised not to use these under like 50 degrees, but while the shuttle was sitting on the launch pad, it was like less than 30 degrees. And so that's what caused the Challenger to crash and explode. And I actually got like choked up reading about the whole Challenger crash. It's just really sad. While many of these women went on to have long careers in NASA, career in other fields, the book does end there because one of the 6 has passed away. So as you can tell, I really liked this. I'm so glad I read it. Very much in the vein of Hidden Figures, Flight Girls, all these other books that I've read about trailblazing women and groups of women. And the epilogue talks about Eileen Collins, who was the first female pilot for a shuttle mission and the first female commander for a mission, and mentions Christina Cook and Jessica Meir, my current favorite astronauts. Mark my words, Jessica Meir is going to be the first woman on the moon. I'm calling it now. I am 2 chapters into The Star of Moon Village. I am filming this in the afternoon. Earlier today I wanted a book to read on my lunch break, so I picked this up briefly. I first saw this book in my local indie bookstore. It's by an author that I've read from before, Jennifer Ann Richter. This is a near future sci-fi book. It's the 2070s. There's an established colony on the moon. It's mentioned briefly that there was a group on Mars who all died in an accident. So spaceflight is kind of common and accepted, although it's not like people are jetting all over the solar system. There's a rigorous process to select people to go to space, and where I stopped reading in chapter 2, our main character, Priscilla, has been selected for going to the moon. So was her dad, and she's in fact the youngest person to be selected. It mentioned a little bit like the selection process, and it actually reminded me of The Six. And I think that what happens in here is that she gets to the moon, and there is like maybe an influencer that she feels like is not bringing the right attention to this like mission and community, and there's going to be some like friend tension because they knew each other previously. I flipped ahead to the author's note to see if she cited any particular books. Yeah, she talks about NASA's website, and she recommends some books for readers of this age. There's a Packing for Mars for Kids by Mary Roach. I love that. That's a great book. But yeah, I'm guessing that this is going to incorporate like a lot of science and accuracy in a community on the moon, which is what I'm looking for this video, and I'm excited to read further. I'll update you probably when I'm halfway along, might be when I get to the end, kind of depending on how busy I am in the next few days here. I finished The Star of Moon Village. I didn't update you, sorry. I was having a nice evening reading out on my balcony and I didn't want to interrupt it. I'm giving this 3.5 stars. I think it does some things really well, and then some things that like kind of made me scratch my head. You don't often see middle grade sci-fi, and so I want to give it big props for that. Like I said, it's set in the near future. It is confirmed 2079, and I think that the thing that the author did that bothered me the most was keeping like too much relatable like middle grade relationship drama in it. And yes, like fighting with your friend or being jealous of someone who is rude to you, being annoyed by an influencer, like these are all things that will probably continue into the future, although hopefully not the influencer one. But if I had picked this up as a kid, seeing, oh my gosh, there's this girl who goes to live on the moon, I would want there to be a little bit more action. And sometimes I was wondering, like, why is this set on the moon? Like, the story kind of could have been told anywhere. As I was reading, you know what this book actually reminded me of was Jenny Nicholson's Star Wars Hotel video. I won't explain any further. The stuff that I really liked was it did show like an accurate, or as accurate as we can expect, depiction of what it would be like to live on the moon. Priscilla is only there for a week, and one of the central tensions of the book is that a lot of scientific funding and like space for research has been pushed to the side in favor of tourism. There's a new concert hall, and the space could have been used for research labs, and the focus is more on hospitality than on scientific research. And Priscilla, as an aspiring scientist, feels very affronted by this. In the book, there are these two kind of VIP guests. One is a Mr. Beast-esque figure named Orion Richter, Ryan something. What's this fool's name? Orion Pratt. And a child star, only a few years older than Priscilla, named Starletta. And Starletta was very rude to Priscilla when they met a few years previously because they're from the same hometown. And so Priscilla resents her and feels like her sweet celebrity girl act is just that, an act. I think that the interpersonal conflicts were handled nicely. If you're going to have this be a book about interpersonal conflict and not like there's a disaster on the moon and only the kids can save it. Like, that's what I would want to write and read, but I understand that not every reader is looking for that, and I'm not the target audience. But the conflict between like the scientists and the tourism was not wrapped up in a satisfying way to me. It was just sort of like, celebrities, they're just like us, and I wanted there to be a bit more like talk about institutional troubles and support, but maybe that's because I'm 30 reading a middle grade book. Sometimes things can be solved by just having a conversation with the right people, and that person turns out to be not as bad as you expected, in middle grade anyway. But that's gonna wrap up my review of this book, and that's actually going to wrap up this video. Thank you all for watching. I had so much fun making this, and I'm like really proud of this video. I've been editing as I go along. I am in love with the thumbnail that I made, and I read some really excellent books for this video, so I'm so glad that you made it this far. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week with my next video.